Hello, this video tutorial is an introduction to the new features of OWASP ZAP proxy related to the authentication and user management. My name is Cosmin Ștefan Dobrin and I'm one of the ZAP development team members. In this tutorial, I am going to give you a brief presentation of the concepts involved and walk you through the steps required for setting up automatic authentication for ZAP. I will start with a brief presentation of the related concepts. First of all, in ZAP 2.0, the concept of contexts was introduced. Contexts are a way of relating a set of URLs together in order to easily perform various actions on them. Usually, a context represents a web application or a subset of it. A new concept in ZAP is also the one of session management method. This represents the way, or scheme, that defines how a web or HTTP session is handled and identified by a server. Most commonly, session management is done through the help of session cookies, but other methods such as query-based parameters exist as well. Moving on, an authentication method represents the process or scheme through which a user authenticates itself in a web application, establishing a new session. The most used way of doing this is by filling a form containing fields for user and password and submitting it through an HTTP post to the server. However, other methods exist as well, such as HTTP authentication, NTLM authentication, and so on. ZAP is also now aware of web application users and allows you to configure them so you can later run various actions from the perspective of a user. While the authentication method defines the process of how authentication is actually done, the users contain the last piece of information needed: credentials. A common example of credentials is a username-password pair. All of these new concepts allow ZAP to provide a series of useful tools for its users. In the following minutes, we will go through the steps of fully configuring the authentication for a web application. So if anything seems confusing right now, we will try to clarify it as soon as possible. We will now move on to the concepts demo and try to see how everything works in ZAP. I've opened a new session of ZAP. It's a brand new one. And for the purpose of seeing how everything works, let's explore a simple application. I'm going to use the budget store for this. And now we see that everything has been added and identified in ZAP. First, we have to define our web application, and as we said, the best way to define an application is through contexts. I'm just gonna include this in a context. Let's call it, let's say, the default context, and then we see that everything has been marked as being part of that application. Now, all the properties related to authentication, session management, and users are present in the session properties right here. And there, for each context, we will have sections for authentication, session management, and users. Thus, we are able to define how these work for that particular web application. If we would have more contexts, for each of them, we would be able to particularly select how, for example, authentication works. Now, let's take each of them separately and discuss them. First of all, we have session management. As I was saying, it's associated with a context, so basically defines how session management is being done for a particular web application. Here in the session properties, we have the session management tab. Let's make this a bit wider. Yes. So we have the session management tab, and here we are basically able to select the session management for the context. The default one, which is usually used, is cookie-based session management, where basically sessions are kept through some cookies, for example, JSession ID or ASP session ID and so on. So far, there is no configuration necessary for this type of session management, so this part is empty. We also have HTTP authentication session management, which is used for websites that require HTTP authentication headers to be sent for each request. I'm just going to move it back to cookie-based session management because this is the basic one. Then let's move on to authentication. So as before, it's also associated with an application, a context. And one of the most important things is for ZAP to know when you or a particular user is authenticated in the application. So this is why we have introduced the concepts of logged in and logged out indicators. These are some regex patterns that are matched in the response messages, and they tell ZAP if the response corresponds to an authenticated session or an authenticated user, and when not. Basically, only one of these is necessary. So the logged in indicator, if found in the response message, tells ZAP that response corresponds to an authenticated user, while the logged out tells ZAP if the message is not an authenticated one. Moving back to ZAP, we will be able to select the authentication in the authentication panel. We have three implementations. First of all, we have the manual authentication. What does the manual authentication actually allows users to authenticate by themselves manually and then make use of ZAP's extension, HTTP sessions extension, which identifies existing sessions. So basically, after selecting manual authentication, for each user, you will be able to select one of the existing identified sessions in ZAP as that user. But most usually, people will use the form-based authentication, which appears on sites that require users to log in via a username and password. So basically, for configuring this, you would need to insert the URL for the login page where the login request is sent. Then in the post data, if necessary, we would include the fields that are being sent. And just to put some examples right here. After changing this, we will see that ZAP has identified the parameters, and it will allow us to select which of the parameters corresponds to the username and which of them corresponds to the password. During authentication, these values, the use and pass-to for now, will be automatically changed to the values for the credentials of a particular user. Of course, if there are any other fields in the request, they can stay here and they will not be changed. So for example, I've added a remember me, and I'm gonna select the username parameter as username and the password parameter as pass, and basically this part will remain the same during authentication. The last type of authentication method is the HTTP authentication, which, as expected, allows people to input the hostname information, realm, and the required port. One other thing that you will see on the bottom of this tab is the logged in and logged out indicator pattern text boxes. They are present on each of the authentication methods, and as I was saying before, allow you to define how ZAP should identify when it's logged in and logged out. For example, a common use for the logged in indicator is the presence of a logout URL. So for example, if here we input the logout page, this is a regex expression, so let's put it like this. If ZAP finds this in one of the responses, it will assume that the page corresponds to an authenticated user. Other examples could include, for example, the existence of something like this, where ZAP will try to identify this exact pattern in the response. For logged out indicators, common examples are the presence of a login page or something like that. Moving on to the users part, of course, they are also associated with the user, and as I was saying at the beginning, they contain the authentication credentials part of an authentication. Basically, the authentication method defines how the authentication is done, while for each user we can define what information is actually required for that user to log in. So when you're defining users, everything that you set up is corresponds to the authentication method and depends on the type of authentication method. So usually it's a good idea to define the authentication first and then just move on to defining users. So to define users, we would move to the users panel, and here we are able to add new users. Sorry, the window was created sideways. So we can define a user here, and then this is the manual authentication. So as I was saying, you are able to select a particular session from here and just click OK, and you have it here, and then you can like modify the user or remove it and so on. Then we have the form-based authentication, and here if we select this in the users, we will be able to input a name, and the password and the user for that, the username for that user, and we are able to do more, to define more users and set everything up. Okay, then we have the HTTP authentication, and as I've already defined some users and they were corresponding to the form-based authentication. If now I'm trying to change the authentication method, ZAP will prompt us to confirm, because all the users defined for the other type of authentication will be removed. Of course, maybe some other type of information is needed, so the users are directly linked to the type of authentication method. I'm gonna click OK for this example, and here we will be able to define users for the HTTP authentication. Okay, now let's move on to a full configuration demo of how to set up ZAP so that it automatically authenticates in the Budget Store application. Let's first go to ZAP and clear everything up, so we start a brand new process to see how everything goes from start to the end. And now let's navigate a bit in the Budget Store application. Now everything is added in ZAP. Now we simply include the application into the context, the base one. We'll also rename it, so we get budget app, so we get it to be more intuitive. And then we have to start setting everything up. The session management is the cookie-based session management, because in the case of Budget Store, it relies on cookies for maintaining the session, so everything is okay. And for the authentication, we have a form-based authentication, and we could fill everything out here, but we'll rely on another method, and I'll show you this right now. And let's start with that. Well, the easier way is to simply log in the favorite browser. I'm gonna do this right now. We've just logged in as the test user. Sorry, and then we can see here that the login request has been identified by ZAP, so we can just right click on it and flag it as the context form based out a hash login request. Doing this will configure everything in this field for that. As we can see, we have everything filled up. Now we just have to select the username field as username and the password field as password, and that's it. Then we would have to fill in the logged in and logged out indicators. There's also an easier way to do this besides directly typing everything here, so let's do that now. If we analyze the post login request, we can take a look in the response, and then we can see that first of all we have something like this. We could use this as the logged in indicator, but I'm gonna go for the logout page, and if this is in the page, it means that the user is logged in. So I can right click on it, flag it as the logged in indicator, and ZAP will automatically add it in the proper field. We can also notice that in the login post data, the username part and the password part have been replaced by this special pattern. This during authentication will be automatically converted to the username of the user and to the password of the user. So more complex patterns can be created by manually editing this post data field. Now let's move on to creating the users. First of all, let's create a simple user, test one. I'm going to type in the information. Let's name it better actually. Okay, I also have another user. It's called example. Okay, and basically right now we have everything configured for automatic authentication for ZAP. A quick recap: we have set up the cookie-based session management. Everything is filled up in the authentication, the URL, the post data, and the logged in indicator pattern. And we have created two users. Right now, a couple of cool actions are available. For example, one of them is here in the attack field. We can spider the URL from the perspective of a user. We can take a look at both examples. And let's start with this one. Let's try to spider this homepage from the perspective of the example user. As you may remember, in the browser we have logged in as the test user. So now let's try to make it automatically spider the app from the perspective of the example user. So let's just click that, and we can see that a lot of pages have been discovered. And let's try to inspect one of them. Let's go, for example, to the password page, and if you scroll down, we can see that the response corresponds to an authenticated example user. If we do that to other pages as well, we are going to see example everywhere. We can also see that it's automatically found logout, and after it didn't find anything. But still, even after discovering the logout page, ZAP automatically authenticated again, and everything works. Also, in the history tab, we can see that there have been 4 authentication requests, all of them succeeding with and logging in the example user. Let's also try to see what happens if we now try to spider this application from the point of test user. Okay, everything was successful. So now if we select a page, we'll see that all the responses correspond to that test user. And a bit of extra information right now. The spider action that we have just used was integrated directly with the authentication part and allowed you to spider from the perspective of a user. But there might be other actions that do not have an already implemented support for interacting with the authentication part and users. And for this, we have developed a special feature. It's called the forced user mode. And what this mode does is that it allows you to force every message that is sent by ZAP to behave as being sent from the perspective of a particular user. So once this mode is enabled, every request that ZAP sends is automatically modified so that it acts like it was sent by a particular user. The setting for this is also in the session properties. There is a forced user tab, and here you can select the existing configured users. I'm gonna select the test user for now, and to enable the mode, you can just right click on this button right here, and right now every request that we are sending will be sent from the perspective of the test user. And just for the purpose of explanation, let's try to resend this message. I'm gonna remove this cookie right here, so we will not send any identification information to the server, and just let's send it. And now if we look in the response, we will see that ZAP automatically authenticated, and we receive the response that corresponds to the test user. So that concludes our tutorial of the authentication and user management features of ZAP. If you encounter any issues or have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact us via the user group or email. Also, to find more information about ZAP or download the latest version, you can visit the ZAP homepage. Thank you for watching.